There are people walking among us who have mastered something most will never understand. They don't talk about it. They don't brag about it. They simply execute with a level of precision that seems almost inhuman. These individuals have accessed a dimension of discipline so extreme, so psychologically demanding, that witnessing it feels like watching someone operate with a different operating system than the rest of humanity. What you're about to discover isn't motivational, it's not inspirational, it's clinical, cold. And if you're honest with yourself, it might terrify you, because you'll realize just how far you are from your potential and just how much of your life has been governed by the invisible puppet strings of your own weakness. Let's start with what discipline actually is, because most people have it completely wrong. They think discipline is about willpower, about grinding through the pain, about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. That's amateur hour. True discipline, the kind that creates monsters of productivity and achievement, operates on an entirely different psychological plane. It's the systematic elimination of the gap between intention and action. It's the complete death of the negotiating voice in your head. It's the transformation of your identity itself into a machine that simply does without question, without hesitation, without the exhausting internal dialogue that plagues normal people. The most disciplined people you'll ever meet don't rely on motivation. They don't feel like it. They don't have good days and bad days. They have systems. They have non-negotiables. They have mental architectures that make discipline the default, not the exception. And here's where it gets dark. They've done something to their psychology that most people would never willingly do. They've killed parts of themselves. The part that wants comfort, the part that seeks pleasure in the moment, the part that says, maybe tomorrow. These parts don't just get suppressed, they get starved, atrophied, and eventually erased from the decision-making process entirely. Let's dissect the mental technology that powers extreme discipline. This isn't theory. This is re-engineering the minds of people who operate at levels that seem impossible to the average person. 1. Identity transformation. The most powerful psychological lever for extreme discipline is identity transformation. Most people try to do disciplined things. The truly disciplined are disciplined people. They don't wake up at 4 a.m. because they're motivated. They wake up at 4 a.m. because that's what people like them do. It's not a choice, it's an expression of who they are. This is dark because it requires killing your old identity, not modifying it, not improving it, killing it. The person who hits snooze, that person has to die. The person who says, "I'll start Monday," dead. The person who makes excuses, executed. This isn't metaphorical. These patterns have to be so thoroughly eliminated that they become foreign to you, like watching a stranger's behavior. 2. Consequence magnification. People with extreme discipline have rewired their perception of consequences. While most people see skipping a workout as no big deal, the disciplined see it as a catastrophic failure that cascades through their entire identity. They've trained themselves to see small failures as existential threats. This is psychological self-terrorism. They've made their own lives so uncomfortable for weakness that the pain of discipline becomes less than the pain of failure. Missing a morning routine isn't just disappointing, it's an assault on their core identity. Breaking a streak isn't just unfortunate, it's proof that they're becoming the person they swore they'd never be. Sound extreme? It is. Sound unhealthy? Maybe. Sound effective? Absolutely. 3. Decision elimination. The disciplined have murdered the decision-making process for routine behaviors. You wake up and decide whether to work out. They don't decide. The workout happens because it's programmed into their existence like breathing. No debate, no consideration, no mental energy wasted on "should I?" They've pre-decided everything: what they eat, when they sleep, how they spend their time. Every decision made in advance is one less opportunity for weakness to creep in. They've turned their lives into algorithms where input automatically generates output, no consciousness required. This requires giving up something most people worship: spontaneity, freedom, the ability to just see how you feel. The disciplined traded those comfortable illusions for something more valuable: guaranteed progress towards their goals, regardless of emotions, circumstances, or how they feel in any given moment. 4. Pain reframing. Here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. People with extreme discipline have reprogrammed their relationship with discomfort. They don't tolerate pain, they've made pain desirable. The burn in their muscles isn't suffering, it's confirmation. The mental strain of focus isn't draining, it's proof they're evolving. They've hacked their dopamine system. Most people get dopamine from comfort, entertainment, ease. The disciplined have rewired their brains to release dopamine from conquest, from delayed gratification, from watching themselves do the hard thing when nobody's watching. They've become addicted to difficulty. And, like any addiction, they need increasingly intense challenges to feel the same high. This is why extreme discipline tends to escalate. It's not enough to maintain. They need to keep pushing harder to feel alive. Let's be brutally honest about what extreme discipline costs, because the Instagram posts don't show you this part. They don't show you the psychological casualties. They don't show you what gets sacrificed on the altar of relentless self-control. People with this level of discipline often become functionally incapable of relaxation. Their nervous systems exist in a state of perpetual activation. They've trained themselves so thoroughly to reject comfort that they can't access it even when they try. Rest feels like failure. Leisure feels like laziness. They've weaponized their psychology so effectively that it turns on them, making genuine peace almost impossible. They become difficult to be around. Their standards for themselves inevitably bleed into their expectations of others. They lose patience with people who make excuses, who lack follow-through, who can't seem to get their lives together. They become isolated, not by choice, but because few people can match their intensity or tolerate their judgment. The identity transformation that makes them unstoppable also makes them rigid. They've built their entire sense of self around their discipline, which means any crack in that armor threatens their entire psychological structure. This creates a brittleness. If they ever fail, if circumstances force them to break their systems, the psychological fallout can be catastrophic. And, perhaps most disturbing, they often lose the ability to access their own emotions. When you've trained yourself to override your feelings constantly, to ignore fatigue, to suppress fear, to push through pain, you don't just turn that off. You become disconnected from your internal experience. You become a machine that achieves but doesn't feel, a robot that performs but doesn't live. Extreme discipline doesn't start with extreme actions. It starts with tiny, non-negotiable commitments executed with religious consistency. The disciplined don't begin by training for marathons. They begin by not hitting snooze, not once, not ever. They build proof to themselves that they are the kind of person who does what they say they'll do, starting with actions so small that failure is inexcusable. These micro-commitments serve a psychological purpose beyond their practical value. Each completion is evidence. Each kept promise is data that rewrites their self-concept. After 100 days of not hitting snooze, you are someone who doesn't hit snooze. After 365 days, it's not a behavior, it's your identity. The disciplined build systems that eliminate escape routes. They don't rely on motivation because they've made the disciplined action the path of least resistance. Gym clothes laid out the night before, meal prep completed in bulk, environment designed to make the desired behavior automatic and the undesired behavior difficult. But beyond environmental design, they create psychological systems, rules with no exceptions. Not, I work out 6 days a week. Instead, I work out every day unless I'm physically injured. The difference is subtle but crucial. The first leaves room for interpretation, for negotiation, for that voice that says today doesn't really matter. The second is binary. You either did it or you broke your code. Those with extreme discipline create artificial consequences that make failure costly. Public commitments, financial penalties, accountability partners who are ruthless, tracking systems that make every failure visible. They've engineered their environment so that the pain of breaking discipline exceeds the pain of maintaining it. More powerfully, they build consequence chains in their own minds. Like, if I skip this workout, I'm the kind of person who makes excuses. If I make excuses, I'll make them in other areas. If I make them everywhere, I'll never achieve my goals. If I never achieve my goals, I'll look back on a wasted life. They've connected the small failure to the ultimate failure, making the immediate choice existentially significant. Extreme discipline feeds on evidence of its effectiveness. The disciplined obsessively track their progress, streaks maintained, weights lifted, time invested, results achieved. This documentation serves dual purposes. It provides motivation during low points, and it makes the cost of breaking discipline unbearable, because you're not just breaking today's commitment, you're destroying a streak, a record, a visible monument to your consistency. The tracking becomes part of the addiction. The disciplined don't just want to do the thing, they want to maintain the streak, to see the numbers climb, to have objective proof of their superiority to their past selves and to others who lack their commitment. Here's what nobody tells you about developing extreme discipline. You have to go through a version of psychological death, not metaphorical death, not exaggerated death, actual ego death, where the person you were, with all your excuses, your comfort-seeking, your negotiating, your rationalizing, has to be systematically dismantled. This process is genuinely painful. There's a period where you're operating with extreme discipline, but you still have the old voice in your head, the voice that says you deserve a break, the voice that questions whether this is really necessary, the voice that wonders if you're taking things too far. During this transition phase, every disciplined action is a battle. You're at war with yourself. But something shifts after enough repetitions, after enough times of hearing that voice and doing the thing anyway, after enough days of proving that voice wrong. Eventually, it grows quieter, then quieter still, then it disappears entirely, or becomes so faint that you barely notice it. What remains is someone new. Someone whose default is discipline, whose natural state is execution, whose identity is built on unwavering consistency. This is the rebirth. And the person who emerges is simultaneously more powerful and more limited than who they were before. More powerful because they can accomplish things that seem impossible to others. More limited because they've traded flexibility for consistency, spontaneity for reliability, ease for excellence. The scary part is, once this transformation is complete, it's almost impossible to reverse. You can't unknow what you know. You can't unsee what you've seen about your capabilities. You can't go back to being the person who makes excuses, because you have proof, mountains of documented evidence that excuses are just choices, and you've become someone who makes different choices. Let's address something that the productivity gurus conveniently omit. Extreme discipline makes you socially incompatible with most of humanity, not because you're better than them, although you might start to think you are, but because you literally operate on a different frequency. Normal social interactions become complicated. Friends invite you out for drinks on a Tuesday, but Tuesday is a workout day, a prep day, a non-negotiable element of your system, so you decline. Not because you don't value friendship, but because you've built an identity that doesn't make exceptions. They think you're being rigid. You know you're being consistent with who you've become. This happens repeatedly until friends stop asking, until you become known as the person who's always training, always working, always grinding. You watch people bond over shared moments of leisure and indulgence, and you're on the outside, maintaining your discipline while they build memories together. Worse, you start to lose respect for normal human behavior. You see people hitting snooze and you feel contempt. You watch people choose comfort over growth and you internally judge them. You listen to excuses and you feel disgust. This isn't malicious, it's a natural consequence of what you've done to yourself. You've killed those tendencies in yourself so thoroughly that seeing them in others triggers the same visceral rejection. The only people who can really relate to you are others with extreme discipline. But those people are rare, and they're equally consumed by their own systems, their own pursuits. So you end up in a strange place, surrounded by people, but fundamentally alone. Because the person you've become through discipline is a person few can understand or keep pace with. Is it worth it? That depends entirely on what you value. Achievement over connection, legacy over leisure, becoming extraordinary over being relatable. There's no right answer, but there is a trade-off, and pretending otherwise is dishonest.
Here's a pattern you'll notice in people with extreme discipline. It never stays static. It always escalates. The person who starts by waking up at 6 a.m. eventually wakes up at 5, then 4:30, then 4. The person who works out 5 days a week goes to 7, then adds a second session, then a third. The disciplined aren't satisfied maintaining. They're compelled to intensify. This is because discipline operates on the same neurological pathways as addiction. The dopamine hit from completing a difficult task creates a craving for the next hit. But like any addiction, tolerance builds. What gave you satisfaction last month now feels routine. You need to push harder, wake up earlier, work longer, sacrifice more to get the same feeling of conquest. The dark psychology here is that the disciplined have essentially become addicted to self-punishment, not in a masochistic way, but in a performance-driven way. The difficulty is the point, the suffering is the point. The harder it is, the more valuable the completion feels. They've hacked their reward system to make pain the prerequisite for pleasure. This creates a dangerous trajectory because there's always another level. Always something harder you could be doing, always a way to be more disciplined, more committed, more extreme. And because your identity is now built on being disciplined, you chase that next level not for the results, but to maintain the high, to prove to yourself that you're still that person, that you haven't gone soft. Some people hit a healthy plateau, finding a sustainable level of discipline that serves their goals without consuming their lives. But others, they disappear into the void, becoming so disciplined that they lose sight of why they wanted discipline in the first place. They become the system. The routine becomes the purpose. The discipline stops being a tool and becomes the entire point.
Let's get scientific for a moment, because understanding the neurology makes the transformation even more unsettling. When you practice extreme discipline, you're not just changing your behavior, you're physically restructuring your brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and self-control, literally grows denser with consistent practice of discipline. Neural pathways associated with delayed gratification strengthen, while pathways associated with impulsive behavior weaken through lack of use. You're not becoming more disciplined, you're becoming a different neural entity. Your dopamine system recalibrates. Normal people get dopamine spikes from immediate pleasures, food, entertainment, social media, comfort. The extremely disciplined have trained their brains to withhold dopamine until after difficult tasks are completed. They've essentially hacked their reward system to make suffering the gateway to satisfaction. This neurological reprogramming explains why discipline becomes easier over time for some people while remaining impossible for others. Once your brain has been rewired, undisciplined behavior doesn't just feel wrong, it feels neurologically unrewarding. Your brain literally stops producing the chemicals that make laziness pleasurable. You've killed the neural circuits that enabled procrastination. But here's the dark side of neuroplasticity. These changes can become so ingrained that they're nearly irreversible. Your brain adapts to expect constant challenge, constant growth, constant discipline. When that's removed through injury, circumstances, or choice, you don't just feel disappointed, you feel neurologically deprived, like an addict in withdrawal. The stress hormone cortisol also plays a role. Chronic discipline keeps your cortisol levels elevated, maintaining a state of readiness and alertness. This makes you more productive, more focused, more capable. It also makes you more anxious, more irritable, and less able to genuinely relax. Your body exists in a perpetual state of low-level stress, which powers your discipline, but slowly erodes your capacity for peace. Understanding this neurology reveals why extreme discipline is both powerful and dangerous. You're not just adopting habits, you're engaging in neural engineering. You're taking the raw material of your brain and sculpting it into something optimized for achievement, but potentially incompatible with happiness, connection, or ease. So here's where we arrive at the uncomfortable truth you need to face. Do you actually want this level of discipline? Not the results of discipline. Everyone wants those. The physique, the achievements, the respect, the accomplishments. But do you want the actual lifestyle of extreme discipline? The social isolation, the inability to relax, the constant self-monitoring, the death of spontaneity, the pressure of maintaining systems that have no off switch. Because if you pursue this path, you're not just adopting habits, you're choosing a life that's impressive from the outside, but demanding from the inside. A life that achieves extraordinary things, but sacrifices ordinary pleasures. A life that makes you formidable, but potentially unlikable. A life that transforms you into someone capable of incredible things, but fundamentally different from who you are now. Most people reading this will be glad they don't have this level of discipline after understanding what it actually costs. They'll realize they value flexibility, social connection, and ease more than they value peak achievement. And that's not weakness, that's honest self-awareness. But some of you are different. Some of you read this and feel recognition, not repulsion. Some of you see the costs and think they're worth paying. Some of you look at the transformation process and feel drawn to it rather than scared of it. If that's you, you're probably already on this path, whether you realize it or not. And for those people, here's what you need to know. The path is real. The transformation is possible. The level of discipline that seems superhuman is accessible if you're willing to pay the price. But pay it with your eyes open. Know what you're choosing. Know what you're giving up. Know who you'll become. You understand what extreme discipline actually is. Not the motivational poster version, not the Instagram highlight reel. The real thing, with all its power and all its costs. You understand that it requires killing parts of yourself, rewiring your psychology, accepting social isolation, trading flexibility for consistency, building your identity on something that must be maintained forever or risk total collapse. You understand that it's addictive, escalating, and fundamentally incompatible with normal human experience. You also understand that it works. That people with this level of discipline accomplish things that seem impossible to others. That they achieve their goals with a certainty that borders on inevitability. That they become living proof of what human potential looks like when fully realized, regardless of feelings, circumstances, or obstacles. Now, you have to decide. Not whether you want the results, that's easy. Everyone wants the results. The decision is whether you want the life. Whether you're willing to pay the real price. Whether you can look at everything this level of discipline demands and costs and say, yes, that's who I want to become. If your answer is yes, understand this isn't something you can half commit to. Extreme discipline doesn't work at 80%. It works at 100%, or it doesn't work at all. You either transform your identity completely, or you remain who you are. If your answer is no, that's equally valid. It means you value different things. It means you've looked honestly at the trade-offs and chosen a different path, one that includes flexibility, spontaneity, and connection at the cost of peak achievement. You know now. The only question left is what you'll do with that knowledge. Before you decide whether to pursue extreme discipline, you need to understand something that changes the entire frame. There are multiple paths to achievement, and extreme discipline is only one of them. The discipline extremists present their path as universal. It isn't. History is full of high achievers who operated nothing like the rigid systems we've examined. Some achieve through creativity rather than discipline, working in bursts of obsession and inspiration, producing extraordinary output from chaos rather than routine. Others achieve through collaboration and influence, their power coming from mobilizing people rather than controlling themselves. Still others achieve through strategy and efficiency, accomplishing in focused hours what disciplined grinders take all day to do. The uncomfortable truth: extreme discipline is often compensatory. It becomes essential for people who lack certain advantages, natural talent, leverage, strategy, or support. It's not inherently superior. It's necessary for some profiles, optional for others. This doesn't diminish its power, but it does mean you should ask whether it's truly your optimal path, or simply the one culture romanticizes most. The real question beneath discipline isn't how much you can endure. It's what you're optimizing your life for. If you're optimizing for maximum achievement and measurable legacy, extreme discipline may fit. If you're optimizing for relationships, presence, and lived experience, it likely conflicts. If you're optimizing for sustainable performance across decades, moderate discipline may outperform extremes. If you're optimizing for authentic self-expression, your ideal discipline level will be individual and fluid. Most people never consciously choose. They absorb the cultural equation: more discipline equals more success equals more happiness. Then they reach disciplined goals and feel empty, burnt out, or disconnected. Extreme discipline is seductive because it offers certainty, control, and measurable worth. But that certainty comes from rigidity. That control comes from constraint. That worth comes from narrowing identity to achievement. So the real decision isn't whether you can become extremely disciplined, it's whether that life actually aligns with what you value. The truly powerful move isn't necessarily becoming extremely disciplined. It's becoming extremely clear. Then aligning your discipline, whatever level serves you, with those truths. Extreme discipline is a tool, not a virtue. Use it if it serves you. Modify it if needed. Reject it if it doesn't. Never let culture convince you there is only one path to potential. You've now seen extreme discipline in full resolution. Its mechanisms, power, costs, limits, and psychology. You know how it's built, why it works, why it breaks, who it serves, who it doesn't. The scariest level of discipline isn't the one that pushes you hardest. It's the one you never question, never examine, never consciously choose. Now you know. What you do with that knowledge is your real decision.